You're watching The Breakfast Club.
Morning, everybody. It's DJ MV Angela Yee, Charlamagne the Guy. We are The Breakfast Club. We got some special guests in the building.
Don't do it.
Now,
please don't.
Please
don't.
I've been practicing this all morning long. I did my research. I watched
mercy.
prior interviews to see how to pronounce this name.
We have Ashley Sawyer.
Ashley Sawyer.
You made it easy. Thank you.
And this one, I looked online.
But
and
I've been here before.
All right, you're right.
For
We have
other
Iffy in the
stuff.
building. Good morning.
Thank
Iffy.
you. Good morning.
I ain't messing with you this morning. Good morning. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank y'all.
How's everything? Now,
It's good. It's windy.
Now let's talk about a bunch of things that's going on.
Yeah.
Of course, Charlamagne has a new book that came out. It's all about mental illness and talking about anxiety and
Right.
things like that.
And you,
Which is
you're
great.
one of the co-founders of the Mental Health Executive Order?
I work with the city on Sisters and Brothers Thrive, which works on how do we find not just ways to connect with Black communities, right, but also ways that actually work, right? So, I heard about your book, and I was like, look at that. Men coming up, sharing their stories, because that's important. Storytellers are important.
Now, you said what works. So what works when dealing with people with mental issues and problems?
Yeah, so the city is doing a great job with like sharing information about training, but what that helps with is like we need the shared language, right? We need to be able to not just say, yo, my uncle shakes and rocks on the weekends. Like we need language to share. But what we're hearing on the ground is that individuals need spaces that are affordable, damn near free, depending on the community. But they also want to know that they're not going to have their children taken away from them, or that speaking up about mental health is not going to harm them in some way. And I think we actually have some way to go when it comes to that. Because the reality is, you say that there's something going on with you, you don't know if ACS is going to come and take your kids. You don't know if the principal is going to do anything to you. So we're learning this past year through Sisters and Brothers Thrive, we're learning so much about what people are telling us, and not just saying, you know what, we're going to create something and you should just take this because we think it works. So hopefully, the information that we found over the last year will inform how cities build out programs that actually are culturally relevant to communities based off of what they're saying they need.
There's a lot of things, too. I didn't even realize anxiety was considered a mental health issue until this year.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, even the word depression, right? People use it, so I'm depressed. And it's like, well, there are a lot of people that don't even know that they're depressed, right? There's some really common symptoms, but we're not monolithic when you talk about depression, anxiety, right? Or even, the way we have relationships with food. Some people just feel like, oh, I'm just moody, or it's just that time, or what have you, when it actually could just be that is how you express that you can't communicate or you're not being heard. So
how can people find out more about their issues? Because the reason I'm always nervous about fads, and the reason I say that is, I'll go back to it. It seems like they said every kid had ADD. If the kid didn't listen, he got ADD. But that necessarily wasn't the case. It was just a quick way for doctors to prescribe a medicine. And I feel like that can happen with mental illness. Like, oh, I think I'm depressed. Okay, you're depressed. Here's something to help you with your depression. Or I can't sleep. I'm having anxiety. Here's something. And I'm nervous
But that's
about
why
that
you don't
as
go
well.
to medication first. You sit down with a therapist or a professional before you just jump to medication.
Yeah, and Ashley does amazing work with especially young girls and femmes and what that means, right? So even when we talk about you go to a therapist in a country that, first of all, has discriminated with education, right? So to be a therapist, you have to go through several stages of education. And we know that we only have about 5% of African Americans of all psychological professionals that are in that field. So what does that mean? That means you go to a therapist that may judge you from where you came from. Or even if they're trying their best, they may just not be able to relate. And even if they can relate, you may not trust them, right? So there are so many barriers based off of therapy. People do therapy shopping all the time, and it can be a strain to be like, this person doesn't work for me, even if they look like you. So I think, and then to your point about prescribing medication, this country is going to have to answer for the fact that for years we've been, guinea pigs for a lot of things, right? So people don't trust the medical profession.
Absolutely.
They don't trust when people give them even just an aspirin, that it's not something more. So we have to recognize that people are living in the realities of oppression and discrimination within the mental health community. So we can't just talk about mental health programs. We have to talk about mental health professionals and who are those individuals and what do they look like.
And I'll just add, so in New York City, there's 1.1 million students. There's less than I would say 2,800 school social workers. So most students don't have an opportunity to talk to a social worker, guidance counselor, to at least get the initial conversation to figure out what might you need, who can I refer you to. We have triple the number of school cops that we have school counselors. So there's a lot of opportunities for young people to get pulled into a system but not get connected to the resources that they need. So some of it is just investing and putting in qualified professionals in our schools, in our community, so that young people and adults and their families have someone to connect to. That's a huge gap.
I have no idea what the hell guidance counselors do.
Really?
Like,
I
look at it as like they help you get into colleges.
Yeah, in some situations, but in schools that are overburdened, the guidance counselor is doing all of the things. But if we had social workers, guidance counselors, all of the resources
spiritual
students
advisors.
need, we wouldn't have to have a guidance counselor who is the college counselor, the gym coach, and all all
that
these
was
other
the only
things.
time I ever went, when it was time to start going to college, and they're like,
Right.
okay, everybody has to go see the guidance counselor to discuss what school you're going to go to.
In my
Really what
daughter's
we
school
need is
now,
social workers.
I think they're being more hands-on. In my daughter's school now, they actually help with tests. Like if there's a test coming up, they help with, well, do you understand this? Do you not understand this? How's everything at home? And they ask more about life.
Right.
Yes.
Are you
like-
having a
like
problem
real
at home?
guidance.
Huh?
Right.
Exactly.
Real guidance.
That's what I'm
I've never had that.
saying.
Real guidance.
And I don't want to knock. I'm not knocking guidance counselors now. I'm just talking about from when I was in school.
Right.
Back in the 80s,
I mean,
90s.
you know what's so crazy is that I had a great relationship with my guidance counselor, but my guidance counselor was also the guidance counselor for a lot of my friends, and they'd had a different experience. And that's when, right before I graduated high school, that's when I was like, oh man, he told all of y'all that you shouldn't go to school and you should go to vocation school. Yeah, none of them had applied, right? Because their guidance counselor told them that maybe they should spend a year off. Right. So I was actually helping them fill out their applications, and most of them got in. But it was just crazy to know that, like, even as we talk about guidance counselors, we have to be careful because guidance counselors discriminate as well. They sometimes will choose which kids they think are the smart ones or the bright ones. And then they think they're given. Well, I mean, they don't even have to choose that. Right. Like, and so I say all that to say that, like, there's some subjectivity in those positions. And to be clear, just because you get somebody that look like you don't mean that they're great for you.
But black people don't like
real.
to talk too, though. Like growing up as a kid, I used to see my dad. My dad never talked to nobody. My mom never talked to nobody. So when I went to school with my guidance counselor and they're asking me personal information, I ain't talking to you.
Well,
See,
What happens in
that's
this house
the
stays in
that's
this
the
house.
problem.
That's what
Go
we
ahead.
were raised on.
But my daughter's different. Now I tell her to express herself. She's able to do that. But at first I was like, I ain't talking to you.
That's actually the misconception, though, because I thought that my parents didn't talk to nobody. But then you find out I was visiting my father in rehab. My mom was going to see a therapist in 1998.
You just didn't know, though.
She wasn't telling us. I didn't start having those conversations with my mom until this year when I started going to therapy.
wow.
So come on, like if we'd have known that 20
we
years ago,
hide
things
so
would have
much
been
though.
different.
Like, and I don't know why we do hide a lot.
Well, because of fear. I mean, you hide. It's interesting. They've actually debunked it now, but there used to be this research that everybody used to share about how many words kids know before they go to school, right? And black kids and brown kids don't know as many words.
I read that.
And but my friend and I, we have a podcast every morning. We talked about, like, all of us are the most, black kids are the most talkative kids ever, right?
Absolutely.
And but there is something, if I don't know any black family that didn't have their parent tell them, when you go to the school, you know what you're supposed to talk about and you know what you're not supposed to talk about. So before you leave the door, you kind of get this, like, subtle instructions about, you laughing because you having flashbacks.
Yes,
Like,
and I tell my daughter that now. Like these are house conversations.
Right.
Right.
My kids know. Like that's not leaving the house. They know.
Right.
I saw
right.
this meme where it was like black kids be like, hey, we don't have any lights in the house. Our lights are
Things
off
like
in the house.
that,
Yeah.
right? Which you should be able to say. Like, if you legitimately
help,
if
you should be able to
help,
say
you
it.
should be able to say it. But that could also trigger mom getting, being seen as unfit or
Right.
what have you. Yeah. So even as we're talking, I mean, we're here. This is great that we're talking about this because it
But
kind
we're
of
here to talk about
A little bit of everything. today.
a little bit of everything. I appreciate
Now let's
this.
talk about the mass bailout.
Yeah.
Love your
let's
T-shirt,
talk
by
about
the way.
Thank you. And we're gonna get you. I brought one for Angela. Angela's gonna have to put one on. But
Angela
we're gonna.
and Charlamagne were the same size.
No,
well,
we
he
don't.
can't have my shirt.
I'm a little bigger.
But even as you were talking about mental health, we obviously see a lot of lack of investment is how we deal with trauma within our communities, and usually it's generationally, right? So Mass Bailout is an effort spearheaded by Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, but it's in extension of many of the marginalized-led, Black women-led, queer people-led movements, especially National Bailout that did Black Mamas Bailout. You guys may have heard about that Mother's Day when folks just came together and was like, we're just putting our money together. We're going to get our own people out. So we are trying to do this to really expose and open and shed some light into what is jail, what is pretrial detention, what is bail, what is the difference between jail and prison, which a lot of people, for the last month, we've been educating folks on just what's the difference.
That's
and the
true.
major difference is that jail is a place for poor people, mostly black and brown, that can't afford to get out, right? Harvey Weinstein is at home right now eating bonbons because he can afford to get out. There are people that haven't even been charged, have not been waiting, right? Khalif Browder, Sandra Bland, they were in detention because they couldn't afford to get out. And as we saw with Sandra Bland, she was killed shortly thereafter, and I'm using that term strategically. But we also know that individuals who are caged are often, if they do die, they die within the first week that they are caged, right? So when you think about what that means for mental health, when you think about the fact that your body is in hostage, and you have individual COs or officers that may be speaking to you any old kind of way or disrespecting you, and you don't have a lawyer, you don't have your family members, you don't have your children. Some people, they
may not have even committed a crime.
Right. And I just want to hop in and talk about the girls and the women who are incarcerated. And we're talking about New York City at Rikers. Many of them are separated from their children. The overwhelming majority are parents. And the other piece of it is there's a study, it's called the Sexual Assault to Prison Pipeline, and it talks about the ways that some people say up to 90% of the girls who end up incarcerated have experienced some form of sexual assault or sexual abuse in their lifetime. So you think about what that means to be in a cage and to be moved, have literally adult men moving your body, telling you what to wear, what not to wear, watching you get dressed, moving you in a van here and there. Like, think about how that exacerbates the things that you've experienced, and then just being separated from your family and your loved one and not knowing what's happening.
Right.
You don't know when your, next court date is. You don't know what's going to happen on that court date, and you're just sitting here afraid. And so that's why we're trying to get people out, and we're focusing on girls and women and trans and queer folks, because there's a part of the narrative around criminal justice that they get left out of.
What is the correlation between sexual assault and people who go into a life of crime, I guess? I don't know, going to prison.
Well, again, when you're in jail, you're not there. You're not supposed to be sitting there for life, right? Like but here's one statistic that I think a lot of people don't know. Women across the country only account for around like 13 to 18% of the entire prison population, but they account for 83% of what they call staff on inmate. And I don't like the term inmate, but that's what it's called, staff on inmate sexual violence. So what that means is that the overwhelming amount of them are exposed in some type of way to this type of violence. So when we've been doing this action while the whole Kavanaugh thing has been happening, right? And it's like everyone was talking about believe survivors, and yet at the same time we're like, but there's a whole population that is invisible that nobody's even talking about. That's probably one of the most exposed to sexual violence. And so we have to also think about how jails and prisons and juvenile detention facilities literally separate individuals from our view, and that's the first form of dehumanization. You can't empathize with something you don't see, right? If it's not in sight, then it's out of mind, right? And so we're trying to bring it back to mind that in New York City, we have citizens. We have people that can vote, people that should be home, people that should be in school, because we also have minors that are there that are separated.
And some undocumented folks, too, who are also hugely at risk. Maybe not citizens, but they still deserve their human rights.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Humans. Right. Exactly. What people, persons, we should really think about all the different intersections that those communities are dealing with, and often intergenerational. So community members, we've had individuals that are part of this mass bailout that they also have gone through Rikers, and they've gone through the system. So at a time now where we're talking about where the jail's going to be, and all of these conversations about decarcerating and decarceration, and the Kanyes and the Van Joneses and all the things that in some ways distract us. We have mothers, we have children right now that need to be reunited with their family.
And how do we do
Van
that?
Jones is doing a good job staying on message as far as prison reform.
Charlamagne, we're not going to do that right now.
You don't think so?
Charlamagne, we're not going to do that right now.
Van Jones?
We're not going to do that.
What do you think? Why do you think he distracts? Because he's very big on prison reform. I would love.
I probably shouldn't have raised his name.
I don't know.
So I'm going to take the fifth.
And I don't have any
one.
dog in the fight at all.
He said no means no. Leave her alone.
Stop it. My God, bro.
Now, question: how do we help though?
Yeah.
Is it donating money? Is it donating time? How can people out there listening that might have had family members deal with the same thing say, I want to help?
Yeah. So the mass bailout effort itself is time limited. We have about one more week in this particular effort. People can go to MassBailOut.com. They can also and should also follow at MassBailOut on Twitter and Instagram. We are planning right now our final teach-in for the city. We'll definitely get you all that information because at that time we want individuals to not only find out how they continue to help organizations that have been doing this work for a long time, including National Bailout, but we also want people to find ways to contribute and support people that are returning home. Mm-hmm. So whether it's cold outside. I mean, we came and we almost got blown away, right? We've gotten requests for jackets. Jackets are expensive. Like the good quality ones are expensive. But also things like makeup. And, we want people to still to know that people do think that they're still human because they are. And so we plan to continue engaging and expanding how we rehumanize, if you will, individuals that have had their humanity stripped away from them. And then, of course, RFK actually does participate in bails quite frequently on a monthly basis. So it's not just about bail in jail. We also need to, make sure that we are connecting people to the organizations that do work outside of this. Girls for Gender Equity is one of those organizations. They're also instrumental with the Me Too movement, and I think you guys have a press conference tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yeah. We're lifting up the girls and the survivors who have experienced sexual harassment and sexual assault in New York City schools. And so we'll be on the City Hall steps tomorrow at 11 a.m. talking, and we won't be talking, the young people will be talking about what it means to be a girl or a gender nonconforming young person in New York City schools. They get told by teachers, well, if you didn't wear those spaghetti straps, you wouldn't be sexually harassed. And really being told, we want to shift the culture in New York City schools. We don't want to get a bunch of kids suspended or expand the school to prison pipeline. We want to change the culture so that young people understand consent and so that young people can feel safe in school.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You brought up Kanye, and it makes me think about the prison thing because he did say something in a stupid way that when you break it down, it makes sense. You think the 13th Amendment should be amended? So
13th Amendment?
Yes. Should be amended so people aren't thrown into prisons and treated like slaves?
It's a trap when you ask two lawyers to, you know what I mean? So, yeah, I'll just give my take, but I would love to hear your take. So the 13th Amendment, in many ways, is it's the biggest, I don't want to curse, but it's trash.
It's a trap.
Right. Yeah. It's trash and it's a trap. To even conscionably think that the thing that was intended to liberate our people also within it has a trap as to, to remind you of who you are not in this society is really problematic. Now, that being said, understanding the processes of what it takes to actually get rid of an amendment, I would not, with this current political climate, play around with any of these amendments because when it's removed, think about it, when you remove something, we don't know what they're going to replace it with. Right. We don't know how they're going to redefine human, person, alien. All of those words are words in the Constitution and they have legal meanings. So I get the essence and the spirit of what he was trying to say. I think Ava DuVernay did an amazing job to open that up with her documentary. But when it comes to what are the solutions, I think we have to realize that in many ways, the courts, courts matter. What Trump is doing right now across the country, packing these courts, using organizations like Federalist Society, there's a whole behind the scenes, people so worried about the Illuminati.
Right.
There's a real Illuminati out there that's fixing stuff. So it's not just about the amendment. It's about how we interpret the amendment. And those individuals that interpret are judges.
Right.
So if we don't have judges that look like us or believe what we're saying, if we're here,
we see who those judges are right now.
Right.
Well, yeah. And now with the Supreme Court, that's one area of concern because what we're also seeing is we're seeing cases being created so that they can make it to the Supreme Court so that we can now see an overturning of some of the rights that many of us have been enjoying. Right. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think Kanye said that in a stupid way. I think Kanye is stupid. And that's
he said abolish. Separate. He said let's abolish the 13th Amendment.
Right, right. He meant
there
well.
There are experts out there. I appreciate that Kanye wants to bring up this conversation, but there are people who really do this day in and day out, who study these issues. There's Brian Stevenson. There are people who really understand these topics, and I think we should look to them. And then we also should be looking to people who are formerly incarcerated, hearing their voices. There's organizations that are led by people of color, Black folks, Latinx folks, who know what they need. But I think think the connection that he's drawing between slavery and our prison system is an important one.
Yes.
We need to understand the ways that our existing criminal justice system or criminal legal system is an extension of slavery. You look at Angola State Prison in Louisiana, it's on a plantation where human beings, black folks, bodies were enslaved. And it is still a prison on a plantation. That should tell us something. And we think about Rikers Island. It was named after a human being who held slaves. So we are talking. So I think the connection that he's drawing there is really, really crucial. And we should be thinking about what are we doing to disband slavery, modern slavery in our existing country? How are we investing in the things that dismantle our prison system and invest in the things like education, like mental health, like housing? People need a place to live, a place to sleep. People need food and clothing and shelter. And we spend all of our resources, so many of our resources. If you look at your state budgets, you look at New York State's budget, we're spending a ton of money to incarcerate human beings and then throwing them back out on the street and say, here, get on, have a good life.
$207,000 a year. $270,000 a year just to hold somebody in jail. We're not even talking about prison, in jail. So when you talk about what that amount could do, literally just for one of those beds could literally impact probably the majority of individuals that are literally held in so the investment that we have, the message that we're sending, that it is actually more of an advantage to our community financially to hold you in there than to ensure that your school is taken care of, to ensure that you have the counselors that we were talking about, to make sure that your NYCHA building doesn't have elevators that could collapse, or that you have a little bit of green space. Like, we are making value instead. We got to get past talking points. Like, we need to look at where does our money go and why are we paying this much for mothers to be separated from their babies, and then we're going to demonize the mother even though she hasn't been charged, and then their child who probably is struggling in somebody's school, like, why is my mom away from me? We're going to demonize the child. So now we're creating this cycle for the babies so that when they become adults, they're now going to be the ones that are going to be vulnerable. So this whole thing is like so cyclical, and it's done by design. It's not a mistake.
And then you get out of jail, you can't get a job, you have no place to live. What are you supposed to do? And then you end up going back to jail.
So let's make correctional facilities real correctional facilities where we actually try to reform people. We give them education, you give them a trade, even physically, like, let them work out again. That's what I think should happen.
Well, let's not put people there, right?
Let's not put people there too,
I think we can imagine. I think we're creative folks. We can think of something different. We can imagine a world where people have what they need instead of sending them away and separating them. There's so much data, so many studies that say the separation from the people who care about you is actually just as harmful, particularly when we're talking about young people. I used to represent kids 16, 17, and then back in the day, kids in the juvenile system. The studies are showing when you just separate this kid from that grandma, that auntie, that coach, that person who cares about them, it's doing so much harm. So what would it look like if we weren't relying on, quote unquote, correctional facilities to do the healing that we need?
And something productive. Let's do something
and look
productive.
what we're seeing with this whole family separation. Because there's a lot of people that, let's be honest, that think this is just a Black people issue, right? So this year, family separation was a huge topic that everyone was talking about, rightfully so. Young people separated at the border, right? Mostly Latinx, communities. And when you see these videos of when babies are reunited with their mothers, even if it's just for I don't want to say just, with 3 months of separation, some of them don't even recognize their mother. Right? And this has been happening. Family separation has been happening on auction blocks in this country since the beginning of time. And people are now just recognizing the psychological trauma of 3 months. You add 400 years, right? And so we actually need to, as a community, we need to start aligning movements and be like, family separation is wrong, period. Pretrial detention is wrong, period, right? You can still get rid of bail and still cage my body. So it's not just about ending money bail, it's about ending detention. What that does is it destroys like how somebody feels connected to other human beings that they already know. So now we wonder like why young people, when they come out and I don't recognize them anymore, there are all these statistics about recidivism. Well, recidivism has a lot to do with the fact, well, I've already been told I don't matter, right? And so why should I care about, how am I going to care about somebody else when I've already been told that I don't matter? So we have to actually like figure out, to Ashley's point, how we actually change this knowledge that we're talking about into like real ways that everyday people can be like, yeah, you know what, that is about me, and that's not just about them or the other. It's really about us. And there's still, as bad as Trump is, there's still more of us than those that are in power trying to destroy our lives. We just have to make a decision that like this is the time now that this is an issue that matters.
You're right. Y'all fucked me up with the staff, taking advantage of the inmates.
But you know that happens.
I know, but that's
Look at Oz.
That's such a plantation mentality. You know what I mean? Like that slave owner on
power.
slave. Like I was like, wow, yeah.
Well, give them the website again where they can donate. And
yeah, please go to MassBailOut.com. Again, the hashtag is MassBailOut. I know we live in such a hashtag society, so in a lot of ways, it's like, our hashtag's really going to make change? But I really encourage people to like circulate, go on that, follow. You all are influencers. We've been blessed to have many influencers that have been a part of this, from John Legend to Common to Orange is the New Black cast. But the reason why that's important is we have decisions that are being made right now in New York City, and individuals probably can't wait till this campaign is over. But we have to show that it's actually an issue that matters, because we know that they're following this. So please go to MassBailOut.com, donate, but also, follow us on on the various social media outlets. If you can't, you may not be able to bail out your family member right now, but even if you just give $5, that counts, right? Absolutely. We should also look at it like we are chipping in to liberate and bring our people home.
There you go. Well, Ashley, Sawyer, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Ify, thank you so much.
Thank you for not messing up my name.
It's The Breakfast Club. Good morning.